introduce our next speaker. John Feeney-Coyle is a senior assistant AG, is that right? Okay, I always get the titles wrong. I could make up a title for John too, as I was doing yesterday. He is like the opioid attorney extraordinaire that I probably talk to 3 times a day most days. He helps us navigate the legal side of the MOU. He actually was one of the authors of the MOU and has just been a great partner. So I'm here to welcome John Feeney-Coyle.
Thank you, Heidi. Good morning, everybody. It's so good to see so many people here. Before I begin, I just want to give you a quick personal note. We have a whole team of lawyers upstairs at the Department of Law who have worked on these investigations and this litigation for years. And oftentimes, it's hard for us to see how our work might be helping people. And all of us were commenting yesterday that you may have seen some of us poke our heads in from time to time, how excited we were to see such a large group of thoughtful and compassionate and empathetic and intelligent people here who are actually been doing this work way longer than we have, who are actually going to make a difference. And so we don't get to see this very often, so I just want to tell you how appreciative we are and excited to see everybody here, and we hope that this money that's available now and hopefully money that will continue to be available in the future really fuels your fire to solve this crisis. So I just want to, on a personal note, thank you for that. The other thing is, this is a little bit odd, but I have to give a few caveats before I start digging into my presentation, and that is, I'm not giving anybody legal advice. What I say here today is not intended to be legal advice. I'm happy to answer questions either now or later, but I'm not giving you legal advice. If some of you would like to ask a question that requires legal advice, I'm happy to talk to your city attorneys, your county attorneys, other legal representatives. The other thing is, I think it's my first slide, is going to talk a little bit about some of the public information regarding the settlements, some of the settlements that are out there. There are additional investigations, litigation, negotiations that are going on with some of these companies and other companies. That information is confidential, and as much as you may want to know that, I'm just going to have to decline to say anything about it or answer any questions about it. So my apologies ahead of time regarding that. I'm going to start by just giving you a bit of a high-level overview of where the litigation and settlement landscape currently sits. And then we're going to dig in a little more detail into how this money is going to look in Colorado and talk about the MOU and how that's going to work going forward. So first and foremost, I want to point out the largest settlement to date, and that is the $385 million for Colorado settlement with 3 of the largest or the largest drug distributors in the world, AmerisourceBergen, Cardinal Health, and McKesson, as well as with one of the largest opioid manufacturers in Johnson & Johnson and Janssen Pharmaceuticals. Colorado stands to get about $385 million from that settlement, and that's due in large part, if not exclusively, in part to all the hard work that the cities and counties did around the state. These settlements were set up to incentivize statewide cooperation, and as General Weiser said earlier, at least in this office, we think Colorado really led the pack around the country in doing that. With the exception of some much smaller states, we were the first state to get near 100% participation and do so in such a cohesive way. So that's due to all the work you have done. I'm going to go a little bit out of order here, and you'll understand why in a second. Next, you may have seen some reporting on this recently. Mallinckrodt Pharmaceuticals, which, as you all know, is also one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, it filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. That bankruptcy plan was recently confirmed, and so money will start flowing from that to the states and to the local governments, hopefully by the end of the year. Colorado stands to receive from that bankruptcy plan about $18 million. Next, the settlement from McKinsey & Company. Our office led an investigation and negotiations with the consulting firm McKinsey & Company for its role in really advising Purdue Pharma and the Sackler family on how to promote and sell OxyContin. that settlement has already resulted in about $10 million to the state of Colorado. Next is probably the most notable of the litigation, and that is the investigation and litigation against Purdue Pharma and the Sacklers. That case is currently sitting in bankruptcy court. It's actually before the Second Circuit Court of Appeals on some very contentious issues around the Sacklers. We, as it currently sits, Colorado would receive a little more than $50 million, but that is pending an appeal and likely a number of other legal steps. So that money is not quite available, and it's still a little bit unknown. Lastly, there's been some recent media attention paid to a settlement announced with two pharmaceutical manufacturers, Teva and Allergan. That settlement has not been finalized, and so I can't really get into the details of that, but based on what has been publicly announced, Colorado would currently sit to receive about $60 million from that settlement. These 5 settlements are just the beginning, hopefully. There are other targets of our office and other AG offices out there that will hopefully result in additional settlements. And certainly our office will be telling you about those if and hopefully when they come. So anyway, that is just a high-level kind of summary of where the litigation stands and the money that Colorado kind of stands to receive. Okay, so I'm going to spend the rest of my time talking more about what's happening here in Colorado. As you all know, I know you've been talking about it a lot today, you've been talking about it a lot over the past year or two. Colorado came together, I think it was last summer, and finalized a memorandum of understanding determining how these settlement funds I just spoke about will be spent in our state. And to be clear, that MOU is intended to apply to all opioid settlements, including those in bankruptcy. Obviously, there could be changes in certain specific settlements, but our intent is that any money that is gained from an opioid settlement flows through the same process governed by the MOU. Those settlements that are finalized, like the ones with Johnson & Johnson and the distributors, are entered as a court order, and the MOU is part of that court order. So the court is ordering the money from those settlements to be distributed according to our MOU. Similarly, the Mallinckrodt Bankruptcy Court, that court is ordering that Colorado's money be distributed according to the MOU. Okay? The MOU allowed Colorado to really maximize its share of the settlement funds. And again, credit to all of you for coming together and getting the levels of participation we saw. The MOU is also intended to ensure that all of the opioid settlement funds are spent appropriately. And by appropriately, I mean on efforts to abate the opioid crisis. It's important to know that appropriately does not mean the right way, right now. I think, as General Weiser said, we certainly acknowledge and probably to some extent want folks to experiment and try new ideas and try new strategies and collaborate, which necessarily means there's going to be failure. Appropriately does not mean we agree or disagree with your strategy. It means that you have to be devoting the money to addressing the opioid crisis. So the MOU is structured to allow some oversight of that to make sure that that happens. And lastly, and I think, from my perspective at least, the intent of the MOU is really to facilitate collaboration. As you all know better than anybody else, this crisis does not know county boundaries or city boundaries or even state boundaries. And so the MOU, while it does divide our state into 19 regions and really has a focus on local government, it is intended to allow you all to collaborate, to share, to pool your money where appropriately, to challenge each other and come up with really good ideas all together. We had all 64 counties sign the MOU. Maybe by now, but early on, I didn't know of any other state that had all of their counties sign on. So again, a credit to you all. We've also had 272 municipalities, which, given the number of cities and small towns we have in this state is quite an extraordinary number. A little bit on the timeline. The settlement with McKinsey and Company, money has already been paid. It will continue to be paid over the next, I think, maybe 2 years, but the vast majority of that money has already been paid to the state. The funds from the Johnson & Johnson and distributors settlement, initial payments have also already been paid. As most of you know, those settlement payments are extended out over 18 years. All of the companies have made their 2022 payments for the state of Colorado, and they're sitting there waiting to be distributed. Also, as I said earlier, the bankruptcy estate for Mallinckrodt is expected to start flowing, I think, within the next couple of months. We believe certainly by the end of the year that money will be ready to flow. And I'll talk a little bit later about how the money is actually going to start flowing to cities and counties. As you all know, the bulk of the money from these settlements goes to regions. We are expecting that money can start flowing to regions in the fourth quarter. For local governments who are receiving money directly, that money may start coming within a matter of weeks. So we'll talk a little bit about that in just a second, but the bulk of the money we expect to hopefully start flowing in the fourth quarter of this year. Okay, I know you all know the structure, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but the MOU divides all of Colorado's opioid settlements into 4 buckets. 20% of it goes directly to cities and counties and other municipalities. 60% goes to the regional share. 10% goes to the infrastructure share, and 10% goes directly to the state of Colorado. What this means is that 90% of these funds are really overseen not by the state of Colorado, but by a collaboration between local governments and the state. Again, that is how the court has ordered our funds to be distributed. So the vast majority of these funds are not controlled by the state, they're controlled by you. I know you all have seen this map, but the regional share, the 60%, is going to be distributed to these 19 regions. For those who are curious about how each region's amount were determined, they were based on public health metrics, overdose rates, MMEs, and death rates, I believe were the metrics used. So it's the percentages or the amounts given to each region are supposed to reflect the severity of the opioid crisis in those regions. There is not a population factor or metric. It is all based on public health data. Okay, a quick note about governance, because there's a lot of different groups that are part of this MOU. The first is, and I think I heard General Weiser talk about this earlier, is the Colorado Opioid Abatement Council, or the COAC. That is the statewide, for lack of a better term, kind of oversight body for these settlement funds. It's actually 13 members, not 14. 6 are appointed by the Attorney General, and then 6 are appointed by local governments. For purposes of this council, we divided the state into 3 areas: the Eastern Plains, the I-25 corridor, and then the western part of the state. Each of those regions appoints 2 members to the COAC, and those members will rotate according to various bylaws that body has adopted. I said that the purpose of this body is to provide some oversight to these funds, and that is certainly true. But I think more importantly, the purpose of this body is to be a resource for all of you, not only because it will have certain experts serving on it that can be a substantive resource, but also because there are people from all over the state who are going to be participating in this, and they will hopefully be able to connect people from the western part of our state with people from the southeast, or people from the metro area with the San Luis Valley, so that ideas can be shared and tested and hopefully improved upon. The 19 regions that we've talked about a lot are governed by regional councils. And I know that I've probably had a few conversations with some folks in this room about who can be on those regional councils and how they're supposed to operate. For the most part, you all, as city and county governments, are charged with figuring out how your region is to operate. Neither the state or the COAC have a lot of say in how you choose to do this, but there are a few kind of rules. One is voting members of these regional councils, however you structure that, whoever's actually going to make the decision in your regions about how money is going to be spent must be either county or municipal employees. And the reason for that is because these settlements are court orders, it is the state and it is the cities and the counties who are actually parties to this settlement. Therefore, they are liable if anything goes wrong. And so the actual decision makers need to be representatives of those governments who sign these settlements and who are really charged with making sure this money is spent appropriately. That being said, the MOU allows all regions, if they choose, to also set up advisory committees or councils that we would hope are made up of predominantly, if not exclusively, experts in the field, in your communities. They can really give the voting members an idea of as to how the money can best be spent and help them strategize. The other, I don't want to say rule, maybe guideline or kind of restriction that is in the MOU about the regional councils is that the regional councils have to certify that they've been formed, which I think everybody has, and when the regions sort of turn over in membership, they have to sort of recertify to the COAC that they are, continue to exist. If they don't exist, or if they can't certify they've been formed because of some conflict within the region, the COAC has the authority to appoint members to the regional council. And the intent behind that was whatever friendly disputes you all might have within your communities and in your region, it can't stop money from flowing to the people that need it. So if a region can't certify that they've been formed, the COAC can step in, appoint regional members so that money can still flow to your region until the region can actually certify that they've formed their council or reformed or transitioned according to their respective governing documents. Okay. Another important element of all of these settlements are what the money can be used for. And you've probably seen Exhibit A, which we'll talk about in just a second more specifically, in the MOU. It basically outlines what are allowable uses for this money. As General Weiser said earlier, the money cannot be used to pave roads or build schools. It must be used to address the opioid crisis. And that's not just the Attorney General telling you that, those are the court orders. Exhibit A in the MOU, which can be found at this link if you haven't seen it, and I believe there are some paper copies somewhere around here, is not a exclusive menu of programs or strategies. It's intended to be kind of an example, a non-exhaustive list of strategies, programs, ideas that the money can be used for. Exhibit A is almost identical to an exhibit in the Johnson & Johnson and distributor settlements, in the Mallinckrodt bankruptcy plan. Our office was involved in drafting this starting many years ago in consultation with a number of experts from around the country. So hopefully it can at least give you some ideas as to what the money can be spent on. But the point I want to make today is that if any of you come up with new ideas that are not found or not clearly found in Exhibit A, that doesn't mean you can't use the money for it. What it probably means is there should be a conversation with the COAC, and I believe the COAC is setting up, if maybe they already have, a subcommittee of sorts to have these conversations. But if you come up with some new idea that's not on Exhibit A, I would encourage you to reach out to the COAC, to talk about it, to have a conversation, because one of the primary goals here is to come up with new ideas to address this crisis, because what we have been doing obviously isn't working, and so people like you, smart people like you, need to start coming with ideas, and hopefully you do think of some things that are not on Exhibit A. But at the very least, we hope that that exhibit can give you a sense of where the boundaries might lie. Okay, last slide, and then I'll open up for questions. This is the next step, getting money out the door. And for those city and county officials here, I want to make sure you really hear this, and you'll get some further communication from our office on this. The settlement funds are not sitting in a Colorado state government account. For all states across the country, the settlements appointed a settlement administrator to really oversee how this money is going to be distributed around the country. For the Johnson & Johnson and distributor settlement, that firm, they're called the directing administrator. And the name of that firm is Brown Greer PLC. They're a settlement administrator firm in Richmond, Virginia. They hold the money. They communicate with the COAC through the Department of Law about how money gets distributed in Colorado. So when your city or county starts getting money, it's not going to be from the state of Colorado. It's going to be from Brown Greer. As I said earlier, the 20% of the settlement funds that go directly to city and county governments. For those who have not opted out and redirected their share to their region, that money is likely to be available in the coming weeks. And so for those cities and counties who are receiving money directly, you will get an email, not from Heidi, not from the state of Colorado, but from the directing administrator from Brown Greer, asking you to enter in whatever banking information or routing information is necessary for your local government to receive the money. To the extent you can, see if you can modify your spam filters. Tell whoever it is in your respective governments to keep an eye out for this, because you can do all the right things, and if you don't respond to this email, you're not going to get any money. So you will see, I know this is the first time I'm saying this, you will see some additional correspondence, communication, outreach from our office to make sure everybody knows about this email. But it is important that you keep an eye out for anything from Directing Administrator Brown Greer. Okay? The last thing I want to make sure to point out, and I'm sure everybody knows this, but for those local governments who do receive money directly, under the terms of the MOU, you will be obligated to report on how you spent those funds, approximately a year from now. And there will be annual reporting every year for the entirety of the 18 years. So just hopefully you won't be shocked by that come this time next year when you're required to report on how you spent that money. That information will all be public. How the state spent its money will be public. How the infrastructure fund is spent will be public. So I think I'm out of time. I can take a couple questions now. I have to leave here for about an hour, but I will be back later to talk on the side. And again, whatever I say is not legal advice. So.
I like that, all of the funding that has come in every settlement will go through this, or has the AG's office received some of the smaller funding?
So it's a good question. The AG's office, our office has received the McKinsey settlement funds. And that's because the MOU was not done before that McKinsey settlement had been finalized. However, General Weiser has committed to distributing that $10 million from McKinsey according to the MOU. So that money is going to be, the McKinsey money actually will come from our office, but it's going to be distributed not the same way. It's going to the regions because compared to everything else, it's so small. It's only $10 million. Even our largest local governments wouldn't get much directly. So the McKinsey money is really split. I think it's 90-10. 90% is going to the region. I'm sorry, 80-20. I think 10% is in the infrastructure fund, 10% the state is going to have, and then 80% will go to the regions. And I think Heidi is working on a process for distributing that. With the exception of McKinsey, all the other money is intended to flow through the MOU. The only thing that could change that is if some settlement out there or some bankruptcy court or other court orders the money to be spent in a different way. And certainly our goal is for that not to happen. The intent is for all opioid settlement money to flow through the MOU structure, if that answers your question.
I have the same question, so.
Do the regions have to spend all their money on a certain timetable? Do the regions have to spend all their money on a certain timetable?
The reason I'm pausing is there's nothing in the MOU that tells the regions when they need to spend their money. The COAC, the oversight board, I would imagine, I'm not on it, so I couldn't say this, but I would imagine they would have questions if a region had money sitting with the national administrator somewhere else for 5 years, 10 years, and hadn't spent it. But there is no like mandatory timeline. So I think especially now in these first few years, regions can feel free to like take a little bit of time and figure out how you want to spend it. But just be aware that if money is sitting out there for a while, I mean, people are going to wonder why. So I know that that's not a.
It's not a reimbursement, is it? It's not a reimbursement, it's a spend, they give it to you first.
That's right, yeah. Any other questions? Okay, I will need to step out for an hour or two, but I will be back later today. If anybody wants to pull me aside, I'm happy to answer any questions that I can. Thank you all, and again, thank you all so much for being here. It's really exciting.
And just in case you're wondering, he can't give legal advice. Thanks, John. All right.